The end of an era in New Orleans, Mario. Sean Payton, speculation really kind of picked up this weekend. Ian Rappaport had the report then. There's plenty of talk about it yesterday. Will he step away from the New Orleans Saints? Will he return and coach in 2022? About an hour and a half ago or so, Ian Rappaport once again breaking the news. Sean Payton is stepping away from the New Orleans Saints, retiring, so to speak. I think there's obviously a lot of question marks people have. It's one of those things where you weren't necessarily doubting that it was real, that it was a possibility, right? I mean, I know we talked about that here yesterday, that, I mean, look, if there's this much smoke, there's obviously some fire somewhere. It's not just completely fabricated. Nothing like that ever is. So, of course, it's plausible. But even though you know that, it's still one of those things that when it actually happens, you take a step back and you're still shocked. And that definitely happened in about an hour and a half or an hour ago when the news came down. But there's so much to go off of here now. Why now? What happens next? Will he return to coaching in some capacity? Who takes over long term now for the Saints? The era of Sean Payton as a whole in New Orleans, 16 years, 15 seasons, Super Bowl champion, multiple double-digit win seasons. I mean, we're going to get into all of it, but it really is, even though, again, something you knew was plausible and wasn't doubted, now that you actually see it and realize that it is true and it is happening, the big picture is so big that it's tough to find words.
Yeah. Well said, man. I'm in shock. Like you said, we kind of had inklings. We kind of knew that this would happen as we got later in the day yesterday and today, that this was a big possibility, I should say. But when it actually does happen, when it actually hits you that Sean Payton will no longer roam the sidelines and lead the New Orleans Saints, that is massive, Musso. I mean, this guy got here in 2006, took over arguably the worst franchise in the NFL, made them Super Bowl champions, made them perennial contenders, and this season, with all the adversity the team had to experience, they still persevered and had a winning season, and they missed the playoffs. But the timing of this definitely makes sense. I think his reputation is still very much intact. He's going to be highly respected, I think, for what he did most recently this past season in year one without Drew Brees. I think he kind of proved to the NFL world, to the fan base, that he can succeed without Drew Brees. Now, that was a very monumental task for the Saints to even get to 9 wins this season. And I think once he kind of had perspective of what he all had to go through with COVID, fighting with the referees constantly, the injuries, the salary cap, it just became too much for Sean Payton, I think. And there's a lot of questions that we had to answer. But for now, Sean Payton just wrapped up by far the best coaching tenure in the history of this franchise. And I hope no Saints fans harbor any ill feelings, Musso. He deserves to be celebrated today.
He does, and he will. As far as a lot of the unanswered questions, the New Orleans Saints will host a news conference at 3 p.m. Central Time. It'll be streamed on their Facebook page, YouTube page, Twitter page. It'll be streamed on NewOrleansSaints.com. I'm sure multiple news affiliates will have it as well. They're all probably scrambling to make their way down there from all across the state now. So you'll be able to find it. How much answer you actually get out of it today, I don't know. I mean, there's already reports that Dennis Allen, Aaron Glenn are going to be candidates for this job. That's the long term, at least as we know now. Again, more answers at 3, hopefully. But what you said deserves to be celebrated, and he will be. I mean, it's not, you said one of the greatest, by far the greatest coaching tenures in the history of the franchise. It's by far one of the greatest coaching tenures in the history of the NFL. To take a franchise of what the New Orleans Saints were before Sean Payton got there, before he officially was announced on January 19th, 2006, what that team was, in coming off of Hurricane Katrina, just the terrible past of the Saints, to have them in the NFC Championship game that year, to win a Super Bowl 3 years later in 2009, to go through Bounty Gate, to come back from that 7-9, 7-9, and then rattle off the current run that they went on. It showed you, honestly, I mean, just how great he really is.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the franchises in the NFL that are still so downtrodden. Somebody like the Detroit Lions. I mean, that's kind of what the equivalent of this would have been, of what Sean Payton did in New Orleans and did in such a short time. It fell off a little bit, and then he was able to bring it back and sustain it. It's one of the greatest coaching tenures in the history of the league.
I gained a lot of respect for Sean Payton in the last 5 years, specifically, Musso, what they were able to accomplish from 2017, because the first 11 years, Drew Brees is in his prime, but then 2017 on, they had to make a lot of changes. They were coming off 3 straight 7-9 seasons, and not just the personnel, but also to the front office. This team had to adapt to a lot, and Sean Payton kept getting older, and he had to keep adapting to players that were getting younger and younger as his star players, and he did a masterful job of that. And again, what he did this year, post Drew Brees in the first year, is absolutely unbelievable, in my opinion. Everything that they had to go through, the injuries, the COVID, I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what he did his whole tenure, but really the last 5 years, everything they've had to tailor. I think a lot of NFL coaches wouldn't have been able to step up that plate and conquer that challenge, but Sean Payton did that. And for that reason, Musso, if and when he decides to come back, which I'm sure he'll clarify in that press conference, he's going to be very in demand. He's probably going to be the most in-demand head coach. And have whatever opinion you want to have, but I give equal credit to Drew Brees and Sean Payton for that run. And I think Sean Payton could have a lot of success without Drew Brees going forward. But what those two guys did, like you said, is unlike anything we saw before in NFL history.
And I totally get needing to step away and needing to break, man. I mean, just this year alone, I think that would have made any coach want to take a break. I mean, it never stopped. It never plateaued for the New Orleans Saints this year through anything, whether it be being displaced by a hurricane yet again, whether it be because of that, playing your first 4 games away from the Superdome, 2 separate COVID outbreaks, an injury to Jameis Winston right when he's finally starting to get rolling. You played 4 different quarterbacks, started an NFL record number of players in a single season. And I still feel like I'm forgetting something out of just what went wrong for that team this year. And
Hurricane.
No, I said that. I think I said the hurricane. Snowball. I mean, snowball effect. And here you go. I'm sorry. I really am just still kind of shocked a little bit that it actually happened.
Yeah, it's over. Everything that happened the last 16 years, the expectations changed, the quarterback dynamic probably changes. We'll get into that in a moment, but I'm shocked as well. And again, if you read the context, maybe you shouldn't be shocked, but once it actually happens, once it hits you that Sean Payton has quite possibly coached his last ever game for this franchise, that's really heavy, man. And this morning, actually, I was thinking, Musso, 2 factors that would help make this really possible. Number one is the fact that Bill Parcells is Sean Payton's mentor, and we saw him do very similar in his career. Retired for 3 years in 1990 after he won the Super Bowl with the Giants. Then he retired again for 4 years after a 3-year stint with the Jets in 1999. I'm pretty sure Sean Payton is leaning on Bill Parcells for advice, and Bill Parcells did that and still had a little bit of success in his second and third stints with the Jets and with the Cowboys later on. But I also think we have to consider that Sean Payton is newly married. I don't think that Skylene Montgomery is like telling him to leave or whispering anything in his ear, but for a guy that's on his second marriage, he might want to prioritize that area of his life a little bit more. We've heard Tom Brady make similar comments in recent days. Certain things you just can't do as a full-time football player and as a full-time football coach, and it's hard to fault Sean Payton for that. He might just want to prioritize other areas of his life right now.
And again, I mean, totally understandable. Man. It's in times like this where you got to take the step back and look at it all, and it's man,
yeah,
it's crazy.
One thing I want to discuss is, do you think that the players were blindsided by this? Because this is something that happens almost yearly with Sean Payton. Yes, there's always this kind of smoke, but again, given the timing, this seemed really realistic, right? But we saw Alvin Kamara put up the tweet yesterday, I'm 100% committed to putting ketchup on my fries, implying that this was all a bunch of fluff, but it was not a bunch of fluff. He's gone.
Well, I mean, I think that goes back to what I don't know if they were blindsided per se, but it goes back to kind of what we started talking about here. It's something you know can happen, but until you actually see it happen, it doesn't sink in.
Even for the players.
And this is when you have that feeling of finality, and obviously that's the first overwhelming feeling that you get, and then you start to pick through and figure out things. And I mean, we'll obviously have much more as the week goes on and as the offseason goes on, when more and more comes out. But right now, it's just so much that feeling of finality, so much that feeling of an end of an era, that I don't really know if I want to say blindsided is the right word, because I mean, you knew it was possible. It's just the realization of it all. I think is what most are feeling right now when it comes to Sean Payton.
Yeah, and it's bigger than just his offense. You know, he's one of the elite offensive minds in NFL history. If you look up the 30 best single seasons yard-wise ever by a total offense, Sean Payton was calling the plays for 5 of those teams. Like, it's unbelievable how good of an offensive mind he was, but his impact goes beyond that, not just the sideline, the teams, but in the organization, Musso. I worked in that building as an intern for Pelicans radio. Like, he influences a lot. His mood even influences a lot. People that work at the facility say we're dealing with summer Sean today. That means he's in a good mood. We're dealing with in the season Sean today. That means he's going to try to micromanage a lot of stuff and not be in as good of a mood. It changes everything for that organization, not just on the football field, but obviously off of it. And this is the end of an era. There are a bunch of questions that we have to answer, and we'll get into that later in the show. But like you said, the finality of this is very, very heavy.
It is. I mean, and look, that happened 16 years. I mean, coaches don't stay that long anymore, ever. And not just the NFL, like really at any level of football or any level of sport. It's so much of a what have you done for me lately, or one guy jumping to the next opportunity, a college coach jumping to go to the NFL, or an NFL coach coming back to college, something like that. I mean, look at somebody like Jim Harbaugh, even in that. And now at Michigan, he might be looking to go back to the NFL. People like Mike Tomlin, people like Sean Payton, they're they're the outlier in today's coaching, not just NFL, but today's coaching. So, I mean, there's a feeling of very much uncertainty now around the franchise that I don't think any of us were really prepared for after the Saints beat the Falcons in Week 18 and missed the playoffs.
And specifically with the Saints franchise. I mean, Alabama had success before Nick Saban was there. Mike Tomlin of the Steelers were successful before he got there. The Patriots had a couple of Super Bowl runs before Bill Belichick got there. But this franchise knows the Sean Payton years, and then they know pain. There's nothing in between.
Yeah.
So the uncertainty gets ratcheted up for a franchise that had one playoff win in almost 40 years before this guy got here. Since he got here, they have 9, and they have a Super Bowl championship. It's a very scary day to be a Saints fan. Can't lie.
The conversation a couple weeks ago was, all right, this is what the Saints look like for the salary cap. Well, they're probably going to get under it somehow, but they're going to have to make some hard decisions. What do they do at quarterback? Do they bring back Jameis Winston, or is there a guy that Sean Payton likes and wants to go get? That's not the conversation anymore right now. It's okay, where do the Saints go as a whole? And then, oh, by the way, you still have to worry about all that stuff too. So, look, they've got a great front office. They'll get it in order. I mean, you got to believe in Mickey Loomis. You got to believe in Mrs. B, that they'll figure it out and whatnot. But it is, like you said, very heavy today. And, I mean, look, we can continue on and dive into some of those questions. When does Sean Payton return to coaching? Is there a possibility it's in New Orleans? I mean, there's a lot to get into, and we'll continue to break it down here on Early Line.